Greetings and welcome in the name of Christ to the Spruce Pine United Methodist Church's online connection for Sunday, October 22nd, 2023. We're so glad that you joined us today. So in our continuing study of the Bible through the year, we're going to be talking about what does courage look like. So if you will, center yourselves, center your space, get ready for worship, and may the peace of Christ be with you.
The superhero character Wonder Woman was introduced in 1941 when the world was in the thick of World War II. In fact, Wonder Woman was introduced just 2 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor. Her character was created by William Marston, a writer and psychologist who also invented the lie detector test machine. Given the world events of his day, Marston came up with the idea for a new superhero who would battle evil and corruption not with fists or weapons, but with love. When he mentioned his idea to his wife, Elizabeth, she said, "Fine, but make her a woman." Thus, Wonder Woman was born. And Wonder Woman's story of origin has changed over her 80-year existence. The most recent and most widely accepted version is that her mother told her she was formed from clay, but she really is the daughter of the Greek gods Zeus and Hippolyta. She was hidden on the island of Themyscira for her protection. But when outside threats to their home encroach upon them, she ventures away from Themyscira to the human world. And this is where she battles Nazism and other forces of evil threatening the world at that time. And she does this using her values of justice, equality, peace, and love. She has superhuman strength and speed and has an arsenal of evil battling equipment that includes her lasso of truth, which prevents people in its grasp from telling lies. Again, think about the lie detector test that Marston invented. And she also utilizes indestructible bracelets to deflect bullets or other means of attack. And in 2017, Wonder Woman made history as the first solo female superhero character to headline a movie. And with a worldwide gross of more than $840 million, it became the highest grossing superhero origin film of all time. And I mention this because of what we read this week in our B1 Bible in 1 Year journey. We covered a lot of ground, finishing up the historical literature of the Old Testament and then starting into some wisdom literature found in the book of Job. And neatly tucked in this section of reading is a courageous Wonder Woman-like story about a Jewish woman named Esther. And it comes at a perfect time because for weeks we've read about divisions, civil wars, the up and down, ebb and flow pattern of behavior where people draw near to God and push away from God. And we ended the historical section with the people of Israel and Judah being conquered and exiled from their homeland. They are unable to worship in the temple in Jerusalem. They've lost their sense of identity and feel abandoned by God. And exile was the most traumatizing and shaping event in the Israelites' history, even more so than slavery in Egypt. In fact, more literature speaks to the causes, conditions, and consequences of the exile than any other experience in the Old Testament. So with all this in mind, let's look at our scripture focus for the week. It comes from the book of Esther, chapter 4, verses 1 through 17.
When Mordecai learned what had been done, he tore his clothes, dressed in mourning clothes, and put ashes on his head. Then he went out into the heart of the city and cried out loudly and bitterly. He went only as far as the king's gate, because it was against the law for anyone to pass through it wearing mourning clothes. At the same time, in every province and place where the king's order and his new law arrived, a very great sadness came over the Jews. They gave up eating and spent whole days weeping and crying out loudly in pain. Many Jews lay on the ground in mourning clothes and ashes. When Esther's female servants and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, the queen's whole body showed how upset she was. She sent everyday clothes for Mordecai to wear instead of mourning clothes, but he rejected them. Esther then sent Hathach, one of the royal eunuchs whose job it was to wait on her. She ordered him to go to Mordecai and find out what was going on and why he was acting this way. Hathach went out to Mordecai, to the city square in front of the king's gate. Mordecai told him everything that had happened to him. He spelled out the exact amount of silver that Haman promised to pay into the royal treasury. It was in exchange for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave Hathach a copy of the law made public in Susa concerning the Jews' destruction, so that Hathach could show it to Esther and report it to her. Through him, Mordecai ordered her to go to the king to seek his kindness and his help for her people. Hathach came back and told Esther what Mordecai had said. In reply, Esther ordered Hathach to tell Mordecai, "All the king's officials and the people in his provinces know that there's a single law in a case like this. Any man or woman who comes to the king in the inner courtyard without being called is to be put to death. Only the person to whom the king holds out the gold scepter may live. In my case, I haven't been called to come to the king for the past 30 days. When they told Mordecai Esther's words, he had them respond to Esther, "Don't think for 1 minute that unlike all the other Jews, you'll come out of this alive simply because you are in the palace. In fact, if you don't speak up at this very time, relief and rescue will appear for the Jews for another place, but you and your family will die. But who knows? Maybe it was for a moment like this that you came to be part of the royal family." Esther sent back this word to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews who are in Susa and tell them to give up eating to help me be brave. They aren't to eat or drink anything for 3 whole days, and I myself will do the same, along with my female servants. Then, even though it's against the law, I will go to the king, and if I am to die, then die I will." So Mordecai left where he was and did exactly what Esther had ordered him. This is the word of God, a gift for all people. Thanks be to God.
Esther's story is fascinating on many levels. It is a superhero-like story about a woman who, against all the odds and facing danger all around her, saves her people from extinction. Esther's story isn't meant to teach us about historical events with historical accuracy. It's designed to push the reader to pay attention to our own lives, to find meaning and purpose through the ups and downs, to do what's right for the greater good, and to be courageous in the midst of seemingly impossible odds. And Esther's story is unique because it doesn't contain the Bible's typical faith components. There are no prayers prayed by any of the characters. There's not a single act of worship in the story, and God is never mentioned in the entire story. And because of all this, scholars differ on what type of literature it is and where it should be placed within both the Hebrew and Christian sacred texts. In addition, questions have been raised as to why it's even in the Bible. But the lack of overt faith elements teaches us to look for the shining light of God's presence and the hidden faithfulness of the people throughout the story. And we find both if we look carefully. Esther epitomizes beauty and bravery. And her name in the Persian language means star, and in Hebrew it means hidden. And throughout this story, we see the light of Esther's character shining. And we also see her courage, which is hidden just below the surface, rise time and time again. And yet, Esther isn't considered the picture-perfect little Jewish girl who every mother uses as an example for their daughters, for several reasons. First, she enters a beauty pageant where the winner becomes a member of the king's harem. And let's not forget, the king isn't Jewish. He's Persian, a Gentile, and a leader of the empire who's ruling over the Israelites. And after Esther wins this Miss Persia pageant, she marries this foreign king and has relations with him, both being a no-no for Jewish people. She hides her Jewish identity and lives in luxury in a Persian court as one of the king's many wives. So some Jewish folks have argued that these aren't admirable qualities to emulate. Now, at the beginning of our focus text, Mordecai, Esther's cousin, learns about a plot by the king's second in command, Haman, who has a personal beef with Mordecai. See, Haman's ego is getting the better of him. Being second in command, people are supposed to bow down in his presence. But Mordecai never bows to him. The author never tells us why, but given that this story was more than likely written during the time of exile, and the Israelites struggled with their identity as God's chosen people who can't worship in the temple, many scholars believe Mordecai is following God's law and commandments by not bowing down to or worshiping other gods. And Haman is so furious with Mordecai that he devises a plan to kill all the Jewish people, not just Mordecai. He and his associates roll some dice called Pur to determine the date of the annihilation. And these dice are an important detail later in the story as well. But Mordecai then tells Esther to go to the king and come clean. Tell the king about her Jewish heritage and plead with him to intervene because of the plot Haman devised to annihilate her people. But as we read, the law of the land states that anyone approaching the king without being summoned is put to death. And Esther hasn't been called by him in the past month. What to do? Mordecai then tells her not to feel like she has any special privilege because of her royal status. She's still Jewish. And she won't escape any impending doom just because of her association with the king. And then he says those well-known and powerful words to encourage her. Maybe it was for such a time as this that you've become part of the royal family. And realizing the opportunity she has to make a difference for her people, Esther draws on her courage and decides that she will consult with the king, even if it means that she gets put to death. Esther puts into play a well thought out plan, and it's risky, not just for her, but for Mordecai as well. She gains favor with the king, and in the end we see a reversal of fortunes for Haman, their enemy, and for the Jewish people. And so the protagonist of the story is a woman whose character sometimes is questioned. And there are no Jewish religious practices noted, and God is never mentioned in this story, yet it is a deeply meaningful story that offers encouragement on many levels. As we noted earlier, Esther's story was written during the time of the Babylonian exile, and it's a story that reflects displacement, and it encourages people to keep going, to find meaning and purpose, even in the midst of uncertain and chaotic times. Her story reminds the people in exile that they can live and even prosper in a foreign land without losing their identity. I mean, Esther has numerous forces standing against her. She's a woman, and in her day, she not only didn't have any power, she had no means of gaining power. As such, Esther symbolizes all Jewish people of the time. Marginalized, subjugated, no power, and no means of gaining power. But Esther reminds her people that they can survive and thrive away from their homeland with no temple to worship in. And they can do this without having to assimilate into their surrounding culture. In other words, they can be who they are without losing whose they are. Now for us, Esther is an in-your-face reality check about the relationship we have with God and the culture we live in. I mean, how often does it seem that God and church are getting lost or are irrelevant in our world? How often do we see Christians being judgmental and hypocritical? How many black eyes have we given God and each other because we're more concerned about our agendas, not God's agendas? Esther's story reminds us that even when God seems absent and can't be found, we can still do the right things for the right reasons. She dared to stand before the king and speak truth to power. And she did this without a lasso of truth or magic bracelets. She used the gifts and talents she had and acted in the moment for such a time as this and saved her people from genocide. Esther is a reminder that no matter how odd or displaced we might feel, no matter how absent God seems, God's light of truth is always present. It may not be obvious to us, and it might be found in unexpected times, places, and people. It's subtle and steady. Esther acted courageously, bravely. And bravery isn't the absence of fear. Bravery is acting in the midst of and in spite of the fear that surrounds us, regardless of what might have happened to her, she steps up. She puts aside her fear and any self-focused agendas and does what is necessary for the well-being of others. Esther knew she was interdependent upon God and others. She was willing to lay down her life for the sake of the greater good. In her hidden light, bravery, and quiet faithfulness to God help us see how we might trust in God when God's ways are not always known and when people around us don't share our viewpoints or faith. We too can trust God when we're concerned about things not working out the way we would like them to. We don't have to be a superhero. We just need to remember who and whose we are. That we're co-creators in God's story of love that changes everything. And even when we don't see God working or working in the ways we want, we can still trust that God is committed to redeeming this world. And that will happen in and through us as God's co-creators. So in a way, that makes us God's superheroes. Amen. Thank you for joining with us here and connecting with us online at Spruce Pine United Methodist Church for our online connection. And we do hope you got a real blessing from being with us today. If you have a need, please reach out to the church. There are many ways you can reach us, whether it's in person, by phone, email, or social media. We would be glad to help you in whatever ways we possibly can. Now, for those of you who are regular supporters of our mission and ministry, we are a team. As always, we say thank you because we do this together. And so we have 4 ways in which you can financially support the mission and ministry of the church. The first is here in person at our 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock services. Now, you can also mail your contribution to the church, and that address is 11090 Highway 226 South in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, 28777. If you live locally and you want to drop off your donation at the church, you can do it during normal church office hours, which are Monday through Thursday, 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Or if you want to do it online, you can go to our website, sprucepineumc.org, then click on the Give and Donate Now tab. Make sure you're signed into your account. And as always, it's a safe and secure giving website. So we've been challenged this week by Esther, who faced all these odds to act courageously and do what's right for the right reasons, for the greater good. And I think that's our challenge, not just this week, but every day, to somehow help bring unity in such a divided and chaotic world, is to think of the greater good and to do the right things for the right reasons. So don't forget that our weekly announcements are coming up right after this. There's a lot going on in the life of the church, and we hope that you have a great week. Shine the light, be courageous, tell of God's story, bring people into the better story God's written for all of us. And we hope to see you next week on our online connection. See you next time.